All right, so this is Vox, a brief history in impunity and Black deaths. Let's see what this is all about.
And the death of an unarmed black man.
George Floyd!
Yeah, except that's when you scale to population. That's not when you scale to their interactions with the police. Like somebody actually did a breakdown. I believe it was Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire, where he calculated the number of arrests to the number of unarmed deaths, and it turned out that like per arrest, the deaths are like almost equivalent, even though white people are slightly more likely, but it's like very slightly. It would be like the difference would be the difference between 1.8 and 1.9 or something like that. So like a 0.1% from a different year. So yeah.
It has been incredibly difficult to prosecute a police officer successfully.
I could actually go over, there's a Daily Wire article about the consequences that the police who killed unarmed people presented, and how some of the people that are listed as unarmed are like people driving at cops in cars. So they technically don't have a weapon, even though the car is a weapon. But okay.
I'm here because I'm sick and tired of seeing black men and women be killed and nothing be done about it.
Geez, how many George Floyd mural photos do you have? This is a very serious video by Vox, by the way. Incredibly serious. So what cases do we think we're going to get from this video? Do we get a Mike Brown mention? It is 2020. It has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Michael Brown is not one of the cases of unjustified police killings. Do we get a Michael Brown mention in this?
We can never be satisfied.
Oh, we got the black and white footage, guys. Black and white footage. Martin Luther King.
As long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality.
Jonathan Ferrell was unarmed when he died, just a month shy of his 25th birthday.
Jonathan Ferrell was unarmed when he died. I don't know the Jonathan Ferrell case, so.
Now that officer, Randall Carrick, is charged with voluntary manslaughter.
A mistrial was declared in the case of a white police officer who shot and killed an unarmed black man. There were protests outside the court after the mistrial was announced Friday.
Shoot! Don't shoot! Unarmed! Don't shoot! Unarmed!
I mean, they have their hands up.
Don't shoot!
Death of Eric Garner of a heart attack on Thursday. The father of 6 can be heard on the tape saying repeatedly,
I can't breathe! I can't!
So we have Eric Garner. Eric Garner was an unintentional killing. Like, obviously the NYPD prohibits neck pressure. So that one was like, I actually agree with the officers firing in that. But to say that the officer putting him in the hold for like a few seconds intended to kill him, that was an intentional murder, is just a no. Like, it's just not true. So like that one is not, that one's a little bit ambiguous. And I know people are going to say like, oh, his health conditions and all that. Yeah, 100%. But that's why that's why the NYPD since 1993 prohibits pressure on the neck. It's because you come up to people with a bunch of health conditions. So
there needs to be prosecution. That's what this is all about.
Many people simply cannot understand why the grand jury did not indict when they could actually see video of what went down between that New York police officer and Eric Garner.
Michael Brown, an unarmed.
Michael Brown, guys. So for those of you who are unaware, the Department of Justice has done an investigation into the Michael Brown case. Michael Brown, according to 3 different autopsies, reached for Officer Darren Wilson's gun. This is indicated in 2 ways. One, he had GSR, gunshot residue, on his hand, but also his hand was so close to the muzzle when it was fired that he had burned, so evidence of a temperature change based on how close his hand was to the gun when he shot. Also, and this is very important, This was while they were in the police car, and the angle of the shot, the trajectory, showed that Brown was reaching for the gun while it was at Wilson's belt, right? This is all in the Department of Justice report. Furthermore, after Brown was shot in the car in his hand, and he hit Officer Wilson before that. This is also supported by the evidence. Brown ran 180 feet west and then turned and charged back east toward Officer Wilson, who was pursuing him. And then he was shot. They had multiple investigations, multiple forensic analysis, all that aligns perfectly with Officer Darren Wilson's story. So Mike Brown he was technically unarmed, but like he was in the process of trying to arm himself. He was charging a police officer. I'm sorry, that's not a race thing. If you punch a police officer, reach for his gun, then run away, the officer chases you, he yells at you to stop, and then you charge him again, then that's not one of these cases. But here's Michael Brown and the numbers. It just goes to show you how legitimate these numbers are.
Armed 18-year-old was shot and killed during a struggle with a Ferguson police officer.
Officer Darren Wilson will not be indicted.
It's the feeling among many
Yeah, he shouldn't have been indicted. He did nothing wrong.
of these people that Black lives don't matter. Not one reason did this grand jury find to indict him.
Ask a question.
Yes.
How can we be promised that this injustice will happen again to another black kid?
It wasn't an injustice. That's how you can be promised that it never happened again, because the injustice you speak of is not an injustice.
Another state
Tomorrow. How can we assure our kids that they're safe out on the street with your officers?
If your kid punches an officer in the face, then reaches for his gun, then gets shot, that's on the kid or the adult. Brown is an adult. If you tell your adult children or kids to not do those actions, Black, white, Asian, whatever, they'll be fine. That is the lesson from this case. If even after that, when the officer pursues you and he tells you to stop, you continue to charge at him, then if you don't do that and you surrender at that point, they'll be fine. That's the lesson, guys. That's all you have to do, is not do that. So the Brown case is nonsense. And of course they're focusing on it because it's like a foundational case for BLM.
That's my
That's
question.
what I want to know. I have a black child.
Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke shot and killed 17-year-old Laquan McDonald.
For the first time in 35 years, a Chicago police officer is charged with first-degree murder.
That officer found guilty of second-degree murder. Very unusual, very important.
So I'm assuming that officer did something wrong and he was charged and convicted for it.
It goes to show you how serious that I am about my life and all these other lives that are out here that are scared of the police.
Tamir. Are we getting a Tamir?
An officer shot and killed 12-year-old.
Oh, come on. How did I even know? Tamir was 12.
Tamir Rice on Sunday.
Tamir Rice was playing with a pellet gun when officers arrived. One of them opened fire within 2 seconds.
Grand jury decided not to indict the two officers who shot and killed 12-year-old.
So, like, from a strategic standpoint, the officers in the Tamir Rice case did make a mistake, right? So, like, you saw the video of them pulling up right next to him. So in a situation like that, you would typically want to pull up further away, maybe have a couple more units so you could set up a perimeter to deter somebody from running away. When you pull up right next to somebody, you leave yourself no room for reaction. That being said, Tamir had a realistic looking pellet gun, which is why he was shot. So like he's unarmed in that he had something that looked identical to a gun and fired pellets. So a little bit of a category error. Also on top of that, the year that this happened, the Rice case happened, and you can look up the numbers, the amount of people shot with toy guns was not disproportionately Black. It was like 28 people, and it was the majority of them were white. So, and I think it was either 28 total or 28 white people and maybe like 6 Black people. Like I'm not 100% sure, but that year in particular, a bunch of people get shot with toy guns every year. It's because we have a country that has a ton of guns in it, and if you have realistic looking prop guns, then that's going to put you in danger, like 100% of the time. So yeah, it's unfortunate. Like, you know, obviously 12-year-old was killed, and obviously I think the officers made a like tactical error in their approach. They left themselves basically no response. And essentially, Tamir would have had to have behaved perfectly, like drop the gun immediately or not, or throw his hands up, or, you know, immediately to not get shot in that scenario, because he had a very realistic looking gun. And yeah, it's very unfortunate. I do feel bad for the parents. And I remember the police department in Ohio, like their captain or their union leader, I forget which one, gave like a really like nasty press conference about it. So I understand why that one inflamed people, because a lot of times it's not necessarily the specifics of the case that bother people. A lot of times it's like how the response is to the case, if that makes sense.
Samir, right.
Like for example, the Garner case was the Garner case like shouldn't have happened. Like the officer should not have put him in the hold according to NYPD protocol. But like the cop in that case, like apologized to the family. He was very remorseful, et cetera, et cetera. Wilson in the Brown case, even though he was 100% in the right, like went on TV and he was talking about how like this was God's plan and all that. And a lot of that read as him saying it was God's plan for him to kill Mike Brown, right? Like he should have just stuck to the facts and not kind of like invoke that in there, because that angered people. So a lot of times the reaction also helps this. And also BLM tends to target cases that are like ambiguous, because they're trying to like create conflict, because the cases that everybody agrees on, like they don't want to talk about. Like the Floyd case, you had like broad agreement based on the video right away. And like so that's why they kind of moved the goalposts on that one. So, yeah.
Cleveland's prosecutor calls it a tragedy, but not a crime.
Doesn't even warrant a trial. That, in my mind, is unacceptable.
Thinking the death of Freddie Gray.
All lives matters, but you got to think about who dying out here.
Prosecutors in Baltimore dropped all remaining charges against 3 police officers in the Freddie Gray case.
Yeah, but the Freddie Gray case was based on like conspiracy theories, like, and I think something like at least half, and it might have been 5 of the 6 officers involved were black. I'm trying to remember the makeup of the officers. So I'm not 100% sure about that.
Samuel DuBose was shot in the head Sunday after being pulled over for a missing license plate.
Officer Raymond Tensing has now been charged with murder and voluntary manslaughter.
The only reason why Tensing is being charged is because there was a body cam. Yes.
Now those charges have been dismissed.
I've never heard of that case.
We will never get a conviction in this case.
The death of Alton Sterling,
African-American man killed by police in Louisiana.
The Louisiana Department of Justice cannot proceed with a prosecution.
All we want is the same justice that they put against us whenever we go through certain trials and tribulations.
Philando Castillo.
So I don't remember the details of the previous one, the one before this. That's I think Alton Sterling, like they were saying he was doing like a bootleg CD or something like that. That's like the myth of that story. No, like I'm pretty sure he was reaching for something. That's why he ended up getting shot, but I don't know it 100%. So Philando Castillo, for those of you who don't know, first of all, Philando Castillo killed by a Latino cop. It was in Minnesota. He said that he had a gun in the car, And then like logically he was reaching for like his wallet, and like the officer was like really panicked and he thought he was reaching for the gun. Like that's the idea, right? So the Philando Castillo is an interesting one, but
supervisor at a school cafeteria where kids loved him.
Police officer Geronimo Yanez shot Castillo to death while he was in the car with his girlfriend and her 4-year-old daughter.
Jurors found Yanez was reasonable in his decision to shoot and kill Philando Castillo during a traffic stop last July.
Under the circumstances, just because he was a police officer, that makes it okay.
I mean, if like, I don't think Castillo should have been shot in that scenario. However, if Castillo would have put his hands on the steering wheel, then he wouldn't have been shot. Like, it was misinterpreted reaching. And I'm pretty sure I heard the video because people have like debated this with me of him saying that he was reaching for it. No, he was saying he wasn't reaching for the gun, but like he was reaching for his wallet. So yeah, that one is an unfortunate one, honestly. But because it doesn't make any sense if he's saying don't reach for it, and he's like, I'm reaching for it. Like typically you don't announce that that you're reaching for a gun before you do it. Also, they pulled over Castillo, I believe, because his car matched the description of an armed robbery. So that's why the officer was amped. And this is like one of those reasons why, even if you feel like you didn't do anything, like you have to remember in the back of your mind that you don't know what information the officer has. And that conflict could be a problem. But yeah, so yeah. Let's see this one.
I think the past two shootings with Alton and Philando have really sparked something.
People being murdered unjustly and not being held accountable. Cops are getting paid leave for killing people.
Former fans burning.
Cops are getting paid leave for killing people. They're not getting paid leave for killing people. They're in a public sector union. So while they investigate, they have to pay them their check. You know what I mean? Like the moment that Colin Kaepernick comes out against like the rubber room system, you know, where teachers that are under investigation for all kinds of criminal behavior, like should no longer get their due process and not be paid while the due process is going on. Like I'll get on board with that. But like, they're not being paid money for killing people. They can't work, but also you have like union contracts that determine how and when you fire public sector union workers. That's what's happening. Like, you know. All right, let's play this.
His number 7 jersey.
I hope you get cut.
He was making too much money to be cut.
40-year-old Terrence Crutcher was killed on Friday when local officers responded to a call of a stalled vehicle in the middle of the road.
12 jurors found TPD officer Betty Shelby not guilty of manslaughter in the shooting of Terrence Crutcher.
That's the one with the woman and this one with the woman, and it's like helicopter footage, right? I think so.
The facts were there. All the elements of manslaughter was there.
The death of 22-year-old Stephon Clark sparked
Stephon Clark, where do I know this guy from? Is that the phone guy?
nationwide protests.
Clark was hit 20 times. He was in his grandparents' backyard at the time.
So what's interesting about this is like the history of like all these cases, but like you can see, first of all, they don't classify armed and unarmed. They don't classify them properly, number one. Number two, like the ones that they're highlighting like a couple of cases every year, like the BLM cases, like, but they're putting that big number. Like there's all these cases that are just like these. Meanwhile, half the ones that they're highlighting are total nonsense. So, and also as this is happening, just remember that about double the number of white people are being killed, like unarmed white people, like more than double this top number right here. So, you know.
This is what we have to do to not only this young man, but those who are going to come behind him.
Police officers will not face.
Well, Clark was like, either they were chasing him or they were chasing somebody else, and then he had the phone or something like that, and it was like a quick interaction.
Charges saying they did not break any laws when they shot Stephon Clark in his grandparents' backyard.
And the same cop who killed him is back on the streets patrolling other communities, running through other people's backyards. I'm uneasy with that.
Anger overnight over the shooting death of 26-year-old Botham Jean in his own apartment.
Yeah, but okay, this is where we get really weaselly. So if this is the case that I'm thinking of, like I'm gonna like in his own apartment, I think this is the case where the cop came home, she wasn't on duty, and then she goes into the wrong apartment and then she fires at him and then she was convicted. Like this is not like this is how somebody saying I remember them chasing that guy specifically and he ended up in his thing. But this is very deceptive right here. So first of all, they got the conviction here. It was for like a lower charge. The woman got 10 years and people were mad, I think, at the brother hugging them, if I have this case right. And like this was like not a cop shooting an unarmed man. This was a person who had left their job. They were outside of their role as a police officer and like ended up shooting this guy in her apartment. Like it had nothing to do with policing whatsoever. So this is like inflating the numbers.
Former Dallas police officer Amber Geiger is waking up this morning behind bars. She was found guilty yesterday of murdering her.
This is how ridiculous this is, though. Like she, like did, like the number off of here is like neither here nor there. Off of the 1609, you know what I mean? Does this just say Black Americans killed by the police? Oh, this isn't even unarmed. Oh, they're pumping up the numbers for this to be unarmed. Okay. Like this isn't even unarmed because it's like 20 a year. So this is inflated. This is armed and unarmed. Like justified, not justified. But like it actually shouldn't count here. And like 1608 is not going to make a difference. But it definitely shouldn't count here. Police charged and police convicted. Because like she was charged and convicted, but she wasn't doing her job as a officer at the time. Like this was like a random like think about it like this, right? If a police officer like pulls somebody over, right, and they just decide that they want to murder them, like then that's like a police officer like involved shooting, right? If a police officer gets into an argument with their neighbor, like, and this isn't even what happened. Like this was like mistaken apartment. She panicked coming off a double shift. She shot this person. She shouldn't have shot him, right? But if a police officer gets into an argument with the neighbor, right, then the argument escalates and the officer shoots his neighbor. That's not a police shooting. That's like a dispute between neighbors. You know what I mean? Like it's not the same thing. Like you wouldn't call like if a police officer like, was committing domestic violence against their spouse, you wouldn't call that police brutality. You would call that domestic violence. So this is a category error. And this one led to a conviction, but it's important to distinguish that this is a category error. I'm trying to help them. But this is how thin it is, by the way. Like their whole narrative that they have to include every single like unarmed case that they could have so they could have a news person say unarmed in their own home like a dope.
Neighbor in his own home.
Tatiana is her name, and everyone is seeing that name on social media. There she is.
She was up playing video games with her nephew when she was shot and killed by former Fort Worth police officer Aaron Dean.
The Fort Worth police officer who shot at Tatiana Jefferson in her own home has been formally charged with murder.
Yeah, from 2013 all the way to 2019. Again, the unarmed cases are really small, and most of these are justified. Even the ones that you highlighted as unjustified, like Michael Brown, clearly justified, unambiguously so. Yeah, police killings, because that's not a crime. Like you have to actually establish a crime. You know what I mean? If there was like 100 shootings, right? And 97% of them were somebody breaks into your house and you shoot them in self-defense, and you were like, wow, out of all the shootings that lead to charges, only 3% of them like only 3%. Out of all the shootings, only 3% of them lead to charges. Like, yeah, because 97% of them were justified. Like, that's why. Like, you know, so it's total nonsense. It was dramatic, though. The music made it dramatic.
Breonna Taylor.
The woman was shot and killed in her apartment. George Floyd died in police custody after an officer pressed his knee.
Breonna Taylor, by the way, like, that's also not going to lead to charges. They did change the law on no-knock warrants, but, like, the police were executing a warrant at that household. While they were executing the warrant, Breonna's boyfriend pulled the gun on them, right? And since it's a no-knock warrant and the police weren't wearing uniforms, it's like a confusing situation. This is why they charged the boyfriend initially, but then they dropped the charges against him. So she was killed in the crossfire, right? Like, but that's not a murder. Like, if you show up, like, if you have a system of no-knock warrants, which is what I disagree with in the overwhelming majority of cases, right? So I'm actually glad that they passed that law. But you have that system, and then the police show up, and they're supposed to execute a no-knock warrant, and then they see a gun, and then there's a firefight, and then somebody else gets killed in the firefight. That's not a murder. They didn't intentionally kill her. Like, that's just not how charges work. Now, the Floyd case, they charged him within 3 days, and, you know, it's not looking good for the main officer. I did an entire video on why the other officers might get off, but, you know.
Knee into Floyd's neck.
Said, "I can't breathe," eerily similar to what we heard in 2014 with Eric Garner.
Now, as I covered in my original video, he was having trouble breathing before they even tried to put him in the car. So, like, this is the defense that Chauvin's legal team is going to put forward for him. That you had a guy with a bunch of drugs in the system that was already unhealthy, had COVID and all those problems. And, you know, therefore, like, they're going to go with the excited delirium syndrome defense, and it may or may not work.
Black Lives Matter.
I filed an amended complaint that charges former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin with murder in the second degree.
Yeah, so I looked at the transcript. When I first heard they upgraded the charges, I presumed that they had additional evidence. When I read the transcript of the body cam footage, I found the exact opposite. So I am pretty, you know, I'm not confident in that second degree murder charge at all. So the badges are gone? I don't know what you mean the badges are gone. Oh, like the first badge. Oh, Tiffany has a first badge. Thank you, Tiffany, for subscribing. I appreciate that. And for throwing out my Streamlabs link. Really nice. By the way, if you guys have a Prime subscription available, I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying you could subscribe to me for free, help the channel, and it doesn't cost you anything. So that's awesome. Oh, apparently the last first badge is gone. I thought the first badge was for like all of today. But anyway, like let me get back to the video. I'll do the chat thing in a minute.
George Floyd, whose killing by U.S. police triggered anti-racism protests right around
Weeks
the world.
of global protests and international support
And impacts around the world.
Protesters marched once again in cities worldwide, demanding police departments change their tactics.
George Floyd!
Yeah, get these foreigners out of protesting for our nonsense. They don't need to do anything.
George Floyd!
The West Bank, Jesus.
George Floyd!
All right, that was really dramatic, and I mean, we knew to a certain extent what the cases were that they were going to highlight, and that it was going to be pretty lame. But you know, somebody's like Trump's America. Yeah, I mean, look, Trump's America is the America where like the Republicans bow to this pressure.